Got a 2008 GMC Yukon hybrid, two-mode hybrid. This came from another shop owned by a friend of mine. He told me they replaced the hybrid battery. They did some other things. I don't really care what they did because you never get the whole story anyway. I checked codes earlier. It had a bunch of codes. I recorded and cleared them. I took it for a good long drive. I drove it hard. I did hard acceleration, hard deceleration, all that. Couldn't get it to act up, so I said, well, my hands are off. Go have someone else drive it. They sent a driver on a road test, and it ended up stalling. The engine died at a stop sign. It would not restart. They towed it back in. Here we are. I've got service hybrid system. Will not start. Won't do anything. So I'm gonna check codes again. This is what I've got for codes. Okay, so I am going to be concerned with all of these, especially the system isolation codes. Just for my own curiosity, I wanted to see what would happen if I erased those codes. Still will not start, but the message appears to be gone. Still gonna look into that. Oh, there we go. It's still broken, good. I can't fix it if it's not broken. As you can see, no codes. We've got the service hybrid system message. Not too surprised. Gonna have to go look at some data. Right there. High voltage interlock circuit status fail, so need to take a look at that. So here's the high voltage interlock circuit diagram. This right here is the interlock loop, and what this is we have a voltage signal that needs to come out and then all the way back in, which means that the interlock circuit is complete. If the interlock circuit is broken in any way, it means that somebody's removed a cover off of a high voltage component. They removed a cover here, a cover here, a cover here. These are high voltage components that if the system detects that they are not isolated and safe, they will shut it down completely so that somebody doesn't get hurt or cause a fire or something like that. So what we need to do is determine if this interlock circuit is open and why. Another thing I'm going to do is skim the diagnostic document for the loss of isolation codes, see if I can come up with any answers there. Here's the power inverter module. Here's an example of the high voltage interlock circuit. This connector right here is just two wires. It sits there. When this cover is removed, those two pins there are disconnected from each other, therefore signaling the control module that there is a cover removed from a high voltage component, and therefore we must completely disable the system. So I'm checking, make sure this is tight, make sure this cover's on tight, and I'm gonna go on down the line and I'm gonna check each one on the diagram and see what I see. Okay, this kind of coincides with the story that they removed and replaced the battery. Okay, here's the service disconnect was properly installed, because I have seen where they forget this. Look, this is a two-stage connector. This is the first stage, and if you don't click that second stage, it will not close the interlock circuit. So you have to make sure that's fully down. But it was in the proper position when I found it, so I'm going to continue looking. Went ahead and removed the remaining covers so I could fully inspect the battery. Namely, right there, there's another interlock connector I need to take a look at, make sure that they've actually installed this properly. Okay, so I checked both interlock circuits inside the battery. I checked the power inverter module cover. I need to check the transmission cable cover now. So I'm down here at the transmission cable connector, and it almost looks like that connector is not quite all the way in. I'm going to see what happens when I push it in further or maybe wiggle it. Okay, well, I disconnected it, wiggled it, reconnected it, and that just seems to be the way that it wants to be. Okay, so I checked all of the quick and easy interlock connectors to check. I've got an internal resistor or something here that may need to check. I've also got 1, 2, and 3 harness connectors that may be a problem. Remember, we have no idea what this vehicle's been through throughout its life, so from here, I may check these connectors because they're probably going to be easy to get to in a quick, easy visual inspection. Or I may come down here and I might use my ohm meter to check continuity through this circuit, or maybe test directly here, test continuity up in here, make sure this is good. It could also be the wiring in between. So this is just going to require some testing. Another strategy to make this diagnostic easier may be to disconnect this X350 connector and check for continuity right here and here, because this should be a complete loop. If this half of the loop is okay, then the problem must be down here. Okay, so here we are 2.5 weeks later, simply because when I first started looking at this vehicle, it was a walk-in and I ran out of time. I had other things on the schedule, so we had to reschedule it in for diagnostics, and here we are. I can barely even remember where I was on this vehicle. I sent somebody on a road test and it ended up failing on them, so we've kind of got an intermittent failure. Sometimes here, sometimes not. Got a service hybrid system indicator. Usually when I come back to a vehicle after a while, I'm probably just gonna more or less start fresh. What did we learn to begin with? We learned that somebody has messed with the battery in the past, and we learned that somebody has messed with the transmission in the past. And we inspected and learned that all of the HVIC connectors appear to be correctly installed. So that's at least some sort of progress. Won't start, won't do anything, which is kind of funny because they were actually able to drive the vehicle back in. They put it in the stall. We disconnected the battery and I hooked the battery back up, and now it won't move, it won't power up, it won't do anything. It's broken again. I just wish it would stay broken. So again, I'm gonna start fresh. I'm gonna check codes. I've at least got something. I've got something here set as current, this ignition. I've at least got something I can look into. So for my own curiosity, I cleared the codes, and this is the only one that come back, and this code doesn't really mean a lot. The vehicle still won't start. Okay, so we've basically ended up back at this document after running in circles and kind of determining that we have a intermittent fault. So we're going to go through the diagnostic steps here and come to a conclusion. Okay, so first off, we need to look into this. We need to know, is this code running past before I do anything? Going to check this DTC status, and it's all passed, so that's a good sign. It means the isolation fault is not inside of the battery. So going off of the code description and the test procedures, it's looking like we've either got some sort of loss of isolation inside of the transmission because the two drive motors are inside of the transmission, or possibly the cabling in between. This might be difficult to diagnose because it's so intermittent, it comes and goes sometimes. Next step, I need to check that all of these codes have run and passed. After verifying those codes have run and passed, I'm going to continue on and follow these instructions and see which direction I need to go from there. Right there, 300 volt DC isolation status failed. Of course, the diagnostic instructions told us to take a look at the motor control module isolation voltages of 1 and 2 and compare them. So let's go take a look at motor control module number 2. And they're pretty much the same. And continuing on, if both MCM isolation voltage values are within the indication range, a loss of isolation is not currently present. So proceed to drive motor generator phase testing. And if we took a look at drive motor generator phase testing, it has us disconnect the cables from the power inverter module, and then it has us disconnect the cables from the transmission also. So we're essentially checking for a short or a loss of isolation on the cables themselves and also internally on the motors inside of the transmission. And look at all these warnings. Step 1 on the test procedure is to disable the high voltage. So I'm not actually going to show you this or that or any of those testing procedures because I don't want anyone to get the idea that they can do this at home. Yeah, stay out. Okay, so I did my testing up top, I did my testing down here for the isolation loss, and everything's suggesting that the loss of isolation is inside the transmission, either drive motor 1 or drive motor 2. It became pretty obvious that yes, the loss of isolation is due to transmission internal. So I need to replace or overhaul the transmission. I've been told there are no remanufactured assemblies available, so most likely I am going to have to rebuild this from the bottom up. If that happens, great, I'll include it in the video. If the customer doesn't want to do it, then I guess you get what you get. Metal, glitter, not good. So I went looking. There are no remanufactured transmissions available. There are no internal components available to rebuild it, and there are no used transmissions with less than 200,000 miles on it. So I'm going to put this back together as is, have the customer tow it out, and this car is probably going to go to the junkyard because we can't fix it. Let's see what kind of chunkage we're dealing with. Look at that. Glitter. Thick. Gooey, chunky. Okay, so we're getting ready to push this out. In summary, 2008 GMC Yukon 2-mode hybrid. Originally came in from another shop. It was drivable. I drove it, did not experience any problems. I sent a driver out for a road test. It broke down on them. Ended up getting towed back to the shop and has never started since then. Has never worked again. We had loss of isolation codes. We had a drive motor position sensor performance code. All of our testing led to a loss of isolation inside of the transmission, and that led us to remove the transmission pan for an internal inspection as well as internal testing. But once we see the big chunks of metal and debris in there, it's game over. And I checked with parts department. We cannot get a remanufactured unit. We cannot get any internal parts to do repairs, and we cannot get a used transmission with less than 200,000 miles on it. So this vehicle's basically going to go to the junkyard. We're done.